Good afternoon and welcome to the ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. And I'd now like to hand you over to Martin Goldstone, CEO. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Lily. Welcome everybody to our interim results presentation. Next slide, please. Usual disclaimer. So today presenting to you is myself, Martin Goldstone, the Chief Executive. I took over as Chief Exec last summer. I've got a 30+ year experience in the pharmaceutical industry across clinical development and drug discovery, commercial deals, but also in corporate finance, M&A. And I'm accompanied by my colleague, Martin.
Hi, yes, Martin Hudson, Finance Director at ONCIMMUNE, joined the company in September last year. Previously been FD in various positions, including at McLaren, or subsidiaries of McLaren and Williams Advanced Engineering, enjoying the journey at ONCIMMUNE so far.
Thanks, Martin. So what we'd like to take you through today is a brief overview of the business, a financial update, a strategy recap, and then progress against our commercial strategy since October, and what we see as the market opportunity from ONCIMMUNE and a commercial update of the pipeline. We will then finish with a summary of the key highlights in the period. So an overview of the business. So for people that are unfamiliar on this call with ONCIMMUNE, we are a focused biotech company looking at measuring autoantibody profiles in humans and also in some animal species. And we do this using a platform that is based in our German operations in Dortmund. We have sales presence on the west and east coast of the US, and in the UK we have our board, SLT, corporate functions, and European sales. When I joined ONCIMMUNE, I was really impressed with a number of things about the business. One was the fact that we have the largest antigen library commercially available for interrogation by our customers. We validated this across a number of disease areas, which we'll talk about later, and in certain human and animal disease models. Another impressive thing about the company was the number of master service agreements that we had signed with major pharma companies, and we have added to those in the period, and also added master service agreements with other organizations as well. And from a research and an academic perspective, we've also worked with some of the world's leading oncology institutions, in particular in the US and in Europe. Next slide, please. So we did a bit of work late last year looking at refining our messaging both to the market and internally. So the mission for ONCIMMUNE is really to enable precision medicine for our partners in order to discover novel biomarkers and potentially drug targets, as well as predict efficacy of treatment in drug trials. What this means is that using our platform and our technology, we're able to precisely identify in individuals their response to diseases and drugs as it affects their immune systems. And we're linking that response to either an outcome in a clinical trial, like do they get better or do they get worse? Or do the patients have an unforeseen side effect or event? And by looking at the drug discovery end of the spectrum, potentially identifying novel drug targets for the pharmaceutical industry, which are themselves both important and commercially very valuable. In terms of our vision, we would like to be seen as globally recognized experts in this technology, which enables these breakthroughs. Next slide. So in terms of the board and senior management, so our board consists of 4 people. Alistair McDonald is our chairman. He was the CEO of Syneos Health, one of the largest global CROs, has an extensive experience in the pharmaceutical industry. And then we have Sally, who is also has extensive industry experience, but more on the biotechnology end and in cancer research in particular. Then myself, with also many years industry experience across various aspects of our industry. And then finally, John, who is really our investor relations and city expert and broker expert. And then My senior management team consists of Martin, who you've met, and Ron, who is our COO, who has been with the business about 4 years, initially as the GC, and offers a great deal of continuity across the business. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to Martin now for the financial update.
Thank you very much. So this morning we released our H1 results for our FY 2024. So our financial year begins on the 1st of September each year. So this is for the 6 months from 1st of September 2023. So talking about revenue first. So for the first 6 months of the year, we recorded revenue of 1.19 million. These are obviously unaudited results at this stage. And that value is greater than 2 key reference points from the prior year. Firstly, the continuing and discontinued operations value for revenue in the first half of the prior year was 1.12 million. But probably more significantly, the revenue for the continuing operations of the business at 1.19 million is very slightly ahead of the 12-month revenue for the continuing operations recorded in FY23. So that effectively means that our business is growing and should record more significant revenue, obviously in the second half of this year as well. The revenues on a quarterly basis are encouraging in the sense that the second quarter of our year showed higher revenues than the first quarter, so that gives some indication as to the traction that the strategy announced back in October last year is bedding in nicely. In terms of our outlook for the full year 2024 for revenue purposes, the guidance is unchanged. We are repeating our guidance of approximately 3 million revenue for FY24. And as Martin will mention later on, we have a growing opportunity pipeline, which is subject to regular review by the senior management team. Moving on to operating loss. So we had an operating loss in the first half of the year of 0.76 million. And again, when comparing to the values from the prior year in a similar way, we can see that loss is reducing. We're not yet at the point of moving into profitability, although of course that remains the aim. But for the moment, it is a good sign that the losses are reducing versus those prior year metrics. What really we're seeing, of course, is the fact that the impact of higher sales is feeding through to nudge the profitability upwards or reduce the loss in this case. But also, I wanted to highlight that actions have been taken about reducing our costs, instilling a cost-focused culture across the business where necessary, and addressing elements of the cost base where it was possible to do so. So those actions are also contributing to that slightly lower loss run rate so far this year. So moving on to cash. So the cash balance at the end of the period is just over 900k. That does compare to about 3.2 million at the year-end point from last year. So net cash usage in the period of 2.3 million. And whilst obviously that is still a net cash outflow, I still think it's encouraging. We have some increasing inflows from our customer contracts, obviously driven by the increase in revenue that we spoke about on the previous slide, and that of course is offset by the largely the fixed costs that we have and the debt service costs that we have in the business. So at the moment, the balance is still towards cash outflow, but as the business continues to grow, we obviously hope that will move us more into net cash generation. Another very important aspect of the cash story is the instructions that have been sent for the release of 1.17 million relating to the funds held in escrow, relating to the disposal of ONCIMMUNE Limited and other subsidiaries this time last year. So very encouraging that those funds are coming through in line with our forecast. So when you combine the current cash position, the the escrow funds coming in and the traction that we have on the sales side, then that prolongs our cash runway to allow the strategy to continue to bed in. So with that, I will hand back to Martin.
Thank you, Martin. So just moving on to a strategy recap. So back in October of last year, we announced the new commercial strategy for the business. And this was in three parts. The first part was really diversifying our customer base. So historically, the business had been quite reliant on a few relationships with Big Pharma. These were impressive in that we'd signed master service agreements with Big Pharma, but for various reasons, the revenues were quite lumpy. We weren't always in receipt of samples because of strategic changes within those businesses. And we didn't really have enough continuity to really farm those MSAs successfully. So we've remedied those things with the Big Pharma accounts. We've been much tighter on sample availability when we've been striking our deals and our contracts. We've successfully chased down some of those older agreements where the samples weren't forthcoming and actually prosecuted some of that work in the first half of this year. And we are building and developing the relationships where we hold MSAs in place with those Big Pharma customers with our new sales team. In addition, we've been expanding the customer verticals that we work across. So there's more emphasis and interest in engaging larger biotech companies that are well-funded to work with us, and we've been successful in that. And also engaging with clinical contract research organizations, as well as translational medicine contract research organizations as partners who will potentially leverage their commercial teams to give us more work. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. Then the next sort of leg of the stool, as it were, in the plan was expanding our business model beyond the price per sample in a couple of ways. One was to expand some of our MSAs into more strategic partnerships where there is more of a fixed fee income available to us in those partnerships on an annual basis, which would give us more forward visibility on revenues, as well as restructuring some of the deal types to include a more strategic, milestone-driven, product development-driven deals. So we have also restructured some of the contracts to include a penalty for non-delivery of samples within a certain agreed time frame with the customer. We haven't had to institute those penalties yet in any of our agreements, but those new agreements have been taken up with customers. We are working on developing the value-based pricing models with some customers where we have potential products in development with them, or what we're working on with them could lead to potential products. And we have had discussions around strategic partnership deals and migrating some of these MSAs into those new structures. Finally, governance and leadership. We've restructured the board, as I've showed you earlier, with a board that's not just streamlined, but very experienced and giving us great depth in terms of the market that we sit in and contacts in that market and knowledge. But also we've refocused the business in terms of its mission, vision, and values. And on a softer note, we've, I think, generated a very positive culture and spirit in the company by engaging with all parts of our business, given how widespread we are across West Coast of the US to Germany. Next slide, please. So progress against this new commercial strategy, what progress have we made? So just a quick reminder of the strategy development that we did, the methodology. So we looked at our internal strengths in terms of our existing platform, existing case studies and work that we've done, access to key opinion leaders, access to technology and materials, and also strength of credibility across these different areas. And then we've measured that against the y-axis, which is the commercial opportunity assessment. So what is the market opportunity as we see it in those different areas, the value of the market, investor appetite and interest, and feasibility for new business models. So what this did was we generated a 4-box model. And what you'll see here is that really what we want to be or want to see is that where we're working should be in that top right-hand quadrant of the 4-box, where obviously our internal strength's high and the commercial opportunity is high. What you'll see here is the execution timeline for these different business models that we've picked up on. So blue is short term. The other color is medium term. I'm colorblind, so I should have picked better colors. Long term is green, I think, and the medium term one might be orange. And then the customer types, so predominant customer types. So round is big pharma, square is biotech, effectively. Triangle could be any, multiple, and diamond is translational medicine. And what you'll see here is that we've colored circles around the areas of interest for us. So the right-hand blue circle really is encompassing the business as is. So the business that we've developed over the years successfully and worked in a lot. So that includes a lot of the autoimmune diseases, as you might imagine, with an autoantibody platform. But also on the left, you've got a bigger green circle, which is the new, and the lighter circle in the middle is the areas that we decided to focus on as a business, developing both new business with those, but also seeing if we could develop and move some of those new approaches into the right-hand box. And by doing that, that means adding case studies, adding validation of methodologies in the space that we can do. Next slide, please. So what this slide shows is where we've been able in the last 6 months to move those new areas. So we've managed to move several of them into that right-hand quadrant. And we've done that through developing either our own research assays or mostly actually with customers in the space. So we've actually worked with customers to develop new methodologies and those new approaches. Next slide. One of the things that we do as a part of our regular review of our strategy, and particularly now we have a larger sales team out in the market, having many more conversations with potential customers, is looking for new areas as well that we can that we think are commercially very attractive and where our platform can be adapted with very little cost and very little actual experimental work. The area that's come out on top consistently is aging research. Now, you'll see in the track here that the other therapy areas that we're involved in already actively, oncology, neurology, autoimmune disease, and infection, many of these do have diseases that are hallmarks of aging. So neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, rheumatoid arthritis, they're all associated with aging. But the aging research piece is more about the mechanisms of aging, the basic mechanisms of how a body ages and what happens to it. Next slide, please. Now, I won't go into this slide in detail because the science, but if you think of when you're young and your immune system is developing, one of the first things the immune system learns is what is self and what is not self. So what is part of your body and what is not part of your body. And if it's not part of your body, if it's an infection or something else, it will be attacked by the immune system. As we age, our proteins go wrong. So the instructions, the genetic instructions that make our proteins can go awry as we age. They go wrong and they produce proteins that the body potentially no longer recognizes, and the immune system then attacks as not self. And some of that can lead, we think, to some of the autoimmune diseases that we see, but also in general, the deterioration of organs as we age. These changes that happen to the proteins are called post-translational modifications. And what we have hypothesized is that we can apply those changes to the antigens, to the proteins in our libraries in a relatively simple chemical way to produce potential biomarkers for aging that can be picked up or recognized in the blood of patients. And this is the way that we will adapt the platform to look at age-related mechanisms of disease. Now, interestingly, we've already had approaches from 2 customers specifically asking us to look for these kinds of biomarkers and to develop our platform this way. So we're actually very excited by this opportunity, and we see this as potentially quite a large additional commercial opportunity for us. Next slide, please. So the market opportunity, this leads me on directly to a market opportunity update and commercial update. So before, we've not really talked much about the addressable market or the markets that we operate in. The two very simple graphs here illustrate some of the challenges the pharmaceutical industry is having on the left, which is basically, it's called Rooms law, which is the reverse of Moore's law. So Moore's law is to do with computer memory and operating ability doubling every so many years. And unfortunately, in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, the overall efficiency of the pharmaceutical industry in discovering and developing new drugs has declined in the reverse to Moore's law. And this is particularly true of the average cost of developing new drugs or bringing them to market when you take into account the cost of all the failures in that process. And I think the graph on the left goes to 2010. It's commonly stated that it costs about $2 billion per new drug being brought to market now. On the right, what you see is the research, the number of citations and papers linking to autoantibody research in health. And what you see here is a steady, almost exponential in recent years growth in research linking to autoantibody research in health. Now, obviously, that's great because what that shows us is a growing interest in the industry in the application of how autoantibodies relate to the health of patients. Next slide, please. In tandem, what you see here is the growth of outsourcing from big pharma companies to the CRO sector, to the contract research sector. So the dark colored bars are the addressable market. So this is basically the clinical R&D budget of all the pharma companies out there. And what you see in the lighter colored bars is the amount that is actually outsourced. And what you see is a growing penetration of the outsourcing market. So more and more of the research that big pharma does is being outsourced. Now, the thing I would note here is that at ONCIMMUNE, we are not really restricted to the amount of work that is outsourced. A number of the projects we work on are actually being worked on internally in the pharma companies we work with. So we can actually address all of the market in the darker bar. Next slide, please. If we break that down a bit further, the total pharma R&D spend is estimated to be about 244 billion, with the total outsourcing market estimated at about 40% of that. And within that, obviously, you see about an 80-20 split between the clinical and the preclinical. Next slide, please. And further within that, you're looking at the biomarker market. So we also play in the biomarker market. So the technology we use can be adapted to spot novel biomarkers. And this is also a huge market, worth nearly 60 billion today. And oncology is about 40% of that. In fact, oncology research as a whole is about 40% of global budgets. And obviously oncology, particularly the newer therapies in immuno-oncology and some of the, they're called biospecifics, where you marry an antibody to a chemical, are the massive growth areas within those markets, and they're all highly applicable to our technology platform. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to try to harness this market, to try to capture it? So since I joined last summer, we've added a number of heads to our BD team. So joining our head of sales, who's based out of Boston, we have a BD manager who joined us last summer, who is in the West Coast. And we hired in December a slightly more experienced sales guy on the East Coast to work directly with Mike. And then in Europe, we have a head of BD Europe who joined us in December again. She is a very experienced industry player. And beneath her, we have a BD associate director who joined us in March of this year, who is also very experienced. And we plan to hire a further US-based BD hire in our FY25, so from September of this year, because the US market is larger on its own than the whole of the European market. And so we need really to have more boots on the ground and more conversations. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of our commercial pipeline as it sat in October of last year. What you see here are the different areas that we're interested in, and these areas represent our focus areas, our new focus areas. And at the bottom, you'll see a line around new CROs. So this is using the CRO market as an additional leveraged partner. What you'll see from here is that as of October 23, we had a couple of big pharma partners signed across method development in adverse event reporting. So CRS is a side effect of immuno-oncology drugs. Cardiotox is a side effect of another class of drugs called checkpoint inhibitors. If we move to the slide that illustrates the pipeline as it sits today, hopefully you can see a big improvement in terms of penetration of each of these different areas and maturity of relationships and projects in those areas, to the point where we signed, as I said, in the period 7 new contracts in the period we've discussed, and many of those projects have actually finished or are at final reporting stage. Our new CRO strategy, we already have one large CRO partner that's generating work with us, and we have actually had over 25 conversations with CROs, but we're actively in discussions with 7 other CROs at the moment as well. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, before I move on from there, there's a couple of points I'd like to raise about this as well. So you can't see the names on this slide for obvious reasons, but if you were, you would see we have very low customer concentration, and also the diversity of customers that we have is now much more diverse across large pharma and biopharma, as well as obviously the CROs. What we see is that our customers are very sticky. We get over 80% of repeat business, which I think says a lot about the quality of the delivery of the projects that we do. And also that we have grown and diversified that customer base with low concentration. Next slide, please. So just in summary, just to summarize the highlights of the period, the new leadership team has now been in place for 10 months. We can't say we're new really anymore. And I think in that period of time, we've done an immense job in the business. We've grown commercial traction, demonstrated by the better revenues that we generated in H1 and how they compare to prior year. We have maintained our guidance for our revenue outturn for this year of approximately 3 million, which would be a growth rate of 150% over the prior year. And so far, actually, we've signed 8 new contracts in the year with a further weighted pipeline of £2.5 million. And by weighted pipeline, these are all contracts in discussion, in negotiation with customers with a budget. The commercial strategy has added longevity and aging as a new focus area in the period, with early commercial traction against that. And we are showing, I think, and demonstrating a further commercial traction in the other focus areas that we picked out in October. The build out of the commercial team is essentially complete, but we do plan to bring in another team member next year. I am going out with the commercial team to the largest pharma partnering conference in the world in Bio in next month, and I'm actually speaking at Bio alongside a couple of top 15 pharma companies purely on autoantibodies and showcasing some of our research and the outcomes of some of our research projects with them. Finally, we have confirmed a new hire. We have a group financial controller joining us in the summer who has a strong audit experience as well. So bolstering our ability to financially report effectively, which Martin has done an enormously good job of doing, but needs some support and help to free him up to do some other more interesting things. So with that, I think I'll close the presentation for now and we'll look at questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. Just while the company take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. As you can see, we have received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. Can I please ask you to read out the questions and give responses where appropriate to do so, and I'll pick up from you at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Lily. So we have had some questions come through. Thank you very much. Some of them we won't be able to answer today, just because they're kind of too detailed for this type of audience, unfortunately. But I will address the ones that we can. So first one relates to the sales process. So what is the sales process for the pipeline? How much sight do you have on future revenue? And what do you see as the catalyst to scale up the revenues? Do you want to do the first part of that question first?
Yeah, sure. So the sales process is really around. There are two things here really. So we proactively obviously go out and select potential customers we would like to speak to. So those with, on the clinical side, a late stage clinical programs in the therapeutic areas and the indication areas that we're interested in supporting. And we would proactively go out to and identify people in those areas to speak to them about their programs and how we might help them. The other is with pre-existing customers where we have these master service agreements. I alluded to this before. We set up a key account management structure where we have each of those accounts have an assigned person whose job it is to really socialize within those accounts and identify further people we can speak to in those accounts, and also socializing our capabilities from the people we already work with in those accounts. And then obviously on the biopharma side, again, it's proactively picking out companies where they're working in program areas of interest to us. On the discovery side, it's really looking at companies that have these high throughput proteomics and genomics. So looking at DNA, looking at proteins in assessing or finding novel drug targets, because our technology is very synergistic with those, we believe, and we can help those companies to be more efficient in how they look for new drug targets or disease target associations. The sales process can take a while. So if it's a new discussion, it can be 6 to 9 months to negotiate or prosecute a new agreement with a customer. And what we have been successful in doing, I believe, is adding further master service agreements with new customers, which does enable us to speed up the contracting process once we're already working with them. Because once you have a master service agreement in place, you are really just appending a statement of work to that master service agreement. You've agreed the basic terms under which you're going to work together, and it's really a case of setting out, you know, what the scale of the project is, how long it takes, and then pricing it accordingly. So that helps. In terms of forward visibility of pipeline, at the moment we're still very much a project-based fee for service business. So we are prosecuting deals on a project-by-project basis, unless it's with a large pharma under an MSA. And so these projects, we uncover them as we go. I believe that the current pipeline we have at the time of the report of the interims, we had 15 contracts in discussion with different customers. Now, the more the better, obviously, but obviously with 15, that gives us a good number of shots on goal, and gives us the opportunity to understand how many of those we can convert in a given period. And we've got, I think, good historic data that shows us and tells us how successful in general we are. Our success rates in that regard are higher than the industry standard, which is 1 in 3, and it's well evidenced. So that gives us some visibility on revenue and some idea of what we might see. Martin, do you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered everything. I think the general point is that the robustness behind how we're doing that, I think, has improved, and that's certainly the point about shots on goal, having many much bigger sales force now, and putting making sure they're kind of out there having the right conversations should generate much larger opportunities and ultimately drive to more revenue in the future.
Yeah, and I think the point here is that of the sales force we have, 2 joined us in December, 1 in March. So the activity levels have noticeably stepped up with the extra people, but obviously they take a while to bed in and to find their feet for new contracts and new opportunities. So I'm greatly encouraged by the number of conversations we're having already and how the number of contracts under discussion has grown already. And what we'll see is hopefully a back end pickup of those things as well. So that should continue to grow as the new members of the team bed in and become more and more active in the market.
Okay, thank you. So the remaining questions probably fall to me to answer, so I'll read the question out and then do my best to answer them. There's a question around trade payables. So looking in the latter part of the RNS, so just draw attention to also the other liabilities lines. So I think once those two lines are combined, that probably answers the question as to why trade payables have doubled. And then a very specific question: are we holding off certain payments to preserve cash? The answer to that is no. We very much respect the relationships we have with our suppliers, and whilst we're managing cash carefully, we are not holding off payments to our supply base. So last question that I can answer here relates to the R&D spend. So I think someone's picked up that we are showing the fact that the R&D spend, in fact, there's a note in the RNS about it, that we're showing the R&D spend now rolled up into the cost of goods sold. That is really because the team in Dortmund, who form the largest part of our cost of goods sold, are much better utilised in the first half of this year, and we expect that to continue, and therefore treating it as sort of cost of sales, I think, is more appropriate. The R&D spend, as mentioned in the RNS, I felt was immaterial at this stage to call out, and so we'll obviously keep that monitored through the latter part of the year. But at the moment, the R&D spend is rolled into the cost of goods sold. So I think that concludes. Let me just.
Yeah, the majority of our laboratory work is now focused on customer work. Historically, obviously, whilst we had the diagnostic development part in Nottingham, then there was significant R&D done there. But with the disposal of that, really most of our R&D focus is on delivering customer projects.
Yeah. So there is one more question, Martin, probably more for you, that's coming in the last few minutes. So on the master service account management structure, what can be expected opportunity-wise?
In terms of what?
Well, that's all I've got to go. So I guess it's more pointed towards the fact that, obviously we have MSAs in the business at the moment. And I know, or maybe I can have without answering it. So obviously, MSAs we do have in the business and around us, and those were already in place before Martin and I joined in most cases. So I guess one of the focus areas has been to make sure that the conversations with the companies with whom we hold the MSAs were kind of happening, and we're trying to work with those partners to extract project opportunities from them, and work collaboratively with them on a continued basis. So we do expect some more revenue to come from our existing master services agreements.
Yeah. And we have added new ones in the period as well.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, ideally from a big pharma, you'd want to see at least a couple of million of revenue against an MSA in an average year. And that's certainly a goal that we have for some of our more long-standing, shall we say, relationships.
Okay, so I think that concludes the questions. So back to you, Lily.
Thank you for answering all those questions that you can from investors. And of course, the company can review all questions submitted today, and we'll publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. Just before redirecting investors to provide with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, can I please just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I feel like we're on track and that we have successfully demonstrated growing commercial traction, that the models and the strategies that we introduced last October are already bearing fruit. I believe that in the time frame we've been operating in, that's exceptional. That's really surprised me, actually, at how quickly the traction has grown. And with the bedding in of the new sales team, the commercial team, I feel strongly that we are equipped and in a good position to grow on that, set growth on that.
Thank you for updating investors today. Can I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.
Thank you.